Welcome to Washington Today for Monday, February 23rd, 2026. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Thank you for joining us. Snow is piling up in feet across the eastern U.S., but here in D.C., we are merely dusting off our boots. Congress still canceled votes for the day. The federal government offices had a late start, but preparations for tomorrow's State of the Union address go on. And at the White House, President Trump held one of his final public appearances before his speech, highlighting one of his early policy wins, the Laken Riley Act. We'll play you some of that event coming up. Meanwhile, reaction to Friday's Supreme Court decision that struck down many of President Trump's tariffs continues. Senate Democratic Leader Chuck Schumer said his members will oppose any extension of current tariffs, while several media reports show Republicans are divided on the issue. Similar dynamics are at play with funding for the Department of Homeland Security. Discussions between Republicans and Democrats are stuck in neutral, while the White House has not put forth any new plans after Democrats rejected a proposal made last week. And then there's the issue of military strikes on Iran and a House War Powers resolution that is already dividing members of both caucuses. We'll tell you all about it coming up. We begin with some new poll numbers out today ahead of the State of the Union tomorrow night. A new CNN poll shows just 32% of Americans say President Trump has the right priorities and an approval rating of 36%. A Marist University poll finds 57% of those surveyed said the State of the Union is either, quote, not very strong or not strong at all. These new numbers follow Washington Post ABC Ipsos poll that was out over the weekend, which put President Trump's approval rating at 39% and a 60% disapproval rating. As we said, the president hosted families of victims of foreign criminal organizations at the White House today.
We gathered here today for a truly solemn occasion. Throughout this hall, I am joined by heartbroken Americans who have lost parents, siblings, children, grandchildren, and treasured loved ones to the scourge of illegal immigration led in by the past administration. Millions and millions of people from jails, millions and millions of people from countries that we don't want to know about. Drug dealers, murderers, 11,888 murderers were allowed into our country by the Biden administration. These are the angel families that we love, that for decades our government betrayed and our media totally ignored, and I've seen it. When I first got involved with the angel families, I had a meeting. It was so sad. And they got up and spoke, and the media literally just turned off the cameras. They didn't want to hear them. It was my first glimpse as to what was happening. These are sick people that cover stories like that, or that don't cover them, which is worse. Everyone in this room not only suffered an infinite loss, they were the victims of politicians who put the comfort of foreign criminals before the safety of American citizens and American patriots. Their stories were censored and suppressed like maybe almost never before, so that the politicians could open our borders and allow our nation to be invaded. If we didn't win the election, our nation would right now be destroyed. But under the Trump administration, their suffering is forgotten no longer. In just a few moments, I officially sign a proclamation that I've been waiting to sign for a long time, including my first administration. There were so many different legal roadblocks, it was incredible. But we got it done. And I'm doing it today. February 22nd is going to be National Angel Family Day.
The families of Katie Abraham and Rachel Morin and Kayla Hamilton were at today's event at the White House. So was the mother of Laken Riley, Allison Phillips.
Well, this is unexpected, but I think that a lot of people feel like that President Trump is maybe different than the version I've gotten to know. And I just can't thank you enough. You have said from the beginning, literally the day after this happened, that you would not forget about Laken. You weren't president at that time, and you have not forgotten. You have fought a fight that most people would not want to have to fight. Most people wouldn't. They would just say it's just easier not to do this. And President Trump you are doing a thankless job that most people just wouldn't do. And I just can't thank you enough. There are just not enough words to say. Because if you've lived the nightmare that we have lived, you understand the importance of the job that he's doing and securing our nation and fighting for our families. Because this could be any family. This happened to my family. This could be any one of your families. And Laken was the most responsible, hardworking, kind, selfless, beautiful Christian. And she wasn't somebody that put herself in bad positions. She didn't make bad choices. She was just a good girl. And she just wanted to go for a run that morning after she'd gotten up at 4 o'clock the morning before to decorate her roommate's door for her birthday. And she did everything for everyone else. She expected nothing in return. She just wanted to be a good friend and a good sister and a good daughter and a hardworking nurse. She was working so hard for. And I'm beyond blessed and thankful that you're honoring not just Laken, because she's one in a ton of people that have suffered at the hands of illegal immigrants. She's not the only one. And so thank you for honoring all of them, not just Laken. And we're just beyond grateful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joe.
The mother of Laken Riley, Allison Phillips, at the White House earlier today. You can see all of that event at cspan.org and on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. Now, to more reaction from Friday's Supreme Court decision that struck down much of President Trump's tariffs. Punchbowl News' Andrew Desidero writing today, the High Court's decision raises the economic, political, and legal stakes of Tuesday night's State of the Union address even further. Supreme Court justices, who Trump already publicly admonished, will be sitting right in front of him. Anything the president says on trade will be closely watched. In the short term, the situation could lead to fewer tariff votes overall, which is a reprieve for Senate Majority Leader John Thune and House Speaker Mike Johnson. These votes have put GOP trade divisions on display and prompted Trump to lash out at vulnerable Republicans who oppose him. That from Punchbowl News' Andrew Desidero. And on social media this afternoon, the president saying he does not need congressional approval on tariffs. He posted, quote, "I do not have to go back to Congress to get approval of tariffs. It has already been gotten in many forms a long time ago. They were just reaffirmed by the ridiculous and poorly crafted Supreme Court decision." He went on to write, quote, "Any country that wants to play games with the ridiculous Supreme Court decision, especially those that have ripped off the USA for years and even decades, will be met with a much higher tariff and worse than that which they just recently agreed to. Buyer beware." That from the president on social media this afternoon. Tariffs were on the mind of Senate Democratic Leader Chuck Schumer this afternoon.
Americans breathed a brief sigh of relief last week when the Supreme Court knocked out Trump's harmful tariff proposals. Americans are suffering because Donald Trump is raising tariffs. People pay more for so many daily goods, so many groceries, for cars, for homes, for everything. And the American people hate the tariffs because they know it's raising their costs. And so, for a brief moment, there was a sigh of relief that you heard from one end of America to the other, because the Supreme Court correctly said the president can't raise tariffs on emergency basis, only the Congress can. But Donald Trump, who is in a bubble, has no understanding of what the American people need, feel, or want, reimposed the tariffs right away, and then he one-upped it, doubled down on it, and raised them again. And now Americans are back in the same position they were before the court decision. Higher prices, more inflation, harder to afford things, harder to pay the bills. And a good chunk of that increase, the difficulty in paying the bills, is because of Trump's tariffs. Democrats will not stand for it. And in fact, the new tariff regime that Trump put in must expire in a few months and needs Congress's approval. I am here to tell Donald Trump and the American people we will not extend those tariffs, and they will expire in a few months. And hopefully then Republicans will join us in not allowing Trump to raise tariffs, which so raise costs for the American people. Tariffs are highly unpopular among Democrats, independents, and Republicans. Donald Trump, in his bubble, does not understand the burdens he is imposing on American families, but we Democrats do. And we will do everything we can to stop these odious tariffs that are causing so much harm, so much pain on American families.
Senate Democratic Leader Chuck Schumer on the floor this afternoon. Meanwhile, CQ Roll Call's Eris Foley reporting that House Democrats, Stephen Horsford of Nevada and Janelle Bynum of Oregon, have introduced a bill that would require refunds of tariff money the government has already collected. They would come within 90 days of the bill's passage. And here's House Budget Committee Ranking Member Brendan Boyle of Pennsylvania speaking on that topic yesterday on MS Now.
These businesses, as well as consumers, are owed this money that was unconstitutionally and illegally taken from them by their own government through the policies of the Trump administration. That is their money, billions of dollars worth. It should be refunded. So I believe that, when I go back to Congress, whenever I can dig out of this snowstorm that's falling here in the next day or two, whenever I'm able to get back to Washington, I will be fighting for what I hope will be a bipartisan bill to provide what essentially would be one of the largest tax cuts in American history, to reverse the Trump tax increases that have existed over the last year and cumulatively are the largest tax increase in American history.
Two administration officials were also asked about it on the Sunday shows. Here's Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent on CNN.
I do want to start with the big question. Will you refund the roughly $134 billion in revenue taken by these emergency tariffs?
Well, Dana, that's not the big question. Let's just level set here. What the Supreme Court did was a very narrow reading of the president's authority under the IEEPA tariffs. We have other tariff authorities which have been functioning, Section 232 tariffs, Section 301 tariffs. And Dana, when you say it's a big question, that's bad framing, because the Supreme Court didn't even address that. The Supreme Court remanded it down to a lower court, and we will follow what they say, but that could be weeks or months when we hear them. So the Supreme Court did not address refunds.
Sure, they didn't address refunds. That is clearly going to be up to you, which is why
No, Dana, it is not up to me. It is
not you.
It is not up to the administration. It is up to the lower court. Let's just be clear on that.
Okay. Well, the Justice Department told a federal appeals court in this very case last year, if tariffs imposed on plaintiffs during these appeals are ultimately held unlawful, then the government will issue refunds to plaintiffs.
Again, I'm not the head of the court. We will follow the court's direction, but as I said, that could be weeks or months away. That decision was not rendered on Friday.
What do you think? You're the Treasury Secretary. What do you think should happen? In the past, you have said it is possible.
Again, I want to point to what we're doing. The president, the administration remains undeterred in reshoring American factories and getting rid of these massive trade imbalances. That's the big story here, is that we are immediately going to go to Section 122 tariffs, and that the revenue for the U.S. Treasury for 2026, the projections are unchanged.
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent on CNN yesterday, and U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer appeared on ABC.
And I want to ask you about refunds. It's estimated that the tariffs raised $142 billion in revenue through the end of last year. Will you refund the money immediately or wait for a court order?
Well, we need the court to tell us what to do. They've created a situation where they struck down the tariffs and gave zero guidance on this. Historically, as a trade attorney, in my experience, courts will normally give you some instruction on what to do when the Court of International Trade, which is a district-level U.S. court, my expectation is that they'll have to step in and give some direction on how they want that to be done, if at all, whether plaintiffs had to have made a claim or not. We just need to have guidance from the court.
The tariffs were also a topic at the National Association for Business Economics Conference in Washington, D.C. today. Here's Fed Board member Christopher Waller on what he thinks the Supreme Court ruling will have on the Fed's policy.
Looking forward, there is now a question of how Friday's Supreme Court ruling may affect near-term price increases. Perhaps firms will lower their prices as their input costs associated with tariffs decline. Or prices may be unaffected if the administration quickly reimposes at least some of the tariffs under other laws. It's too soon to know. In any case, since tariffs only temporarily affect inflation, that is why I consider underlying inflation for my policy decisions. Traditional central bank wisdom suggests that we should look through tariffs. I did this when they went up, and I will do so if they come down. So this ruling is unlikely to have a significant impact on my view of the appropriate stance of policy.
Now to the ongoing fight to fund the Department of Homeland Security. Of course, the department in a partial shutdown in its second week now with no deal in sight. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said last week that the most recent Democratic offer, which includes an overhaul of federal immigration enforcement, was, quote, very unserious. House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries said there has been no, quote, high-level effort from Republicans to make a deal. CQ Roll Call's Aidan Quigley reporting that the Senate is expected to try again tomorrow to advance a Homeland Security appropriations bill on a procedural vote. That same vote failed about 10 days ago. And we mentioned the Iran War Powers Resolution. California Democrat Ro Khanna and Kentucky Republican Thomas Massie are co-sponsors. It would direct the president to, quote, terminate the use of United States armed forces from hostilities against the Islamic Republic of Iran or any part of its government or military unless explicitly authorized by a declaration of war or specific authorization for use of military force against Iran. Politico reporting that the resolution's prospects aren't good. Florida Democratic Representative Jared Moskowitz, who sits on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, told Jewish Insider he plans to vote against it, saying, quote, they should just rename it the Ayatollah Protection Act because that's what it does. His opposition comes after House Intelligence Committee Democrat Josh Gottheimer of New Jersey and House Foreign Affairs Committee Republican Mike Lawler of New York said they're also against this resolution. Here's Representative Lawler talking about it to Yahoo Finance.
Look, the War Powers Act requires the administration to notify Congress within 48 hours of a strike. And we have not declared war on anyone since World War II. And so, yes, Congress has a role. Congress has an oversight responsibility. I serve on the Foreign Affairs Committee. I'm chair of the Middle East and North Africa Subcommittee, so very much focused on Iran. And I am constantly in contact with the administration on the policies and decisions that are being made. But you don't, tip your hand, and you certainly don't notify the enemy in advance of a strike. And the idea from some of my colleagues that somehow the administration should be prohibited from taking action against the leading state sponsor of terrorism around the globe, the Ayatollah whose government chants death to America and has been funding Hamas, Hezbollah, funding a ballistic missiles program, their nuclear ambitions, which President Trump...
Well, Congressman, I don't think it's an issue of whether or not the strike should happen. I think it's whether or not Congress should be involved in the decision. And as to whether we're giving them advanced notice, I mean...
Well, that's exactly what you would
we
be
know
doing.
that, I mean, we're talking about it, so we know it's at least a possibility.
No, but that's exactly what you would be doing if you follow the Massey Ro Khanna strategy. The fact is, Congress is involved. We have numerous committees that deal on national security every day. We have an intelligence committee that is constantly briefed on these issues. And obviously, our leadership is in touch with the administration. But the idea that you're going to somehow try to restrict the ability of the administration to take necessary actions, I don't support. And Democrats are completely hypocritical on this point. They had no problem when Barack Obama went into Libya for 8 months and conducted an 8-month campaign. And in fact, when a war powers resolution was brought to the floor, Chuck Schumer voted against it. Chuck Schumer said that Barack Obama had the right to go in. And so you have to be consistent in these matters. You can't just willy-nilly change your perspective because you don't like who the president of the United States is.
House Foreign Affairs Committee Republican Mike Lawler of New York speaking to Yahoo Finance. As we said on the House floor today, votes were canceled, but they are debating several bills, including legislation to tighten aviation safety rules. That comes following last year's mid-air collision near Reagan National Airport here. Also on the agenda, a bill to authorize NASA's development of drone technology to help fight wildfires. You can always watch the House live on C-SPAN and get our full congressional coverage at cspan.org and on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. You're listening to Washington Today.
Members of the United States Congress, thank you very much. And to my fellow citizens, America is back.
Watch C-SPAN live Tuesday as President Donald Trump delivers the annual State of the Union address before a joint session of Congress. Our coverage begins at 7 p.m. Eastern with a preview of the evening from political reporters. Then, at 9, the President's address, followed by the Democratic response given by Virginia Governor Abigail Spanberger. We'll also take your calls and bring you reaction from lawmakers. Over on C-SPAN 2, experience the moments leading up to the speech and the address itself as if you're there. Uninterrupted, no commentary, with unfiltered sights and sounds. The State of the Union Address, live Tuesday, with coverage beginning at 7 p.m. Eastern on the C-SPAN networks. C-SPAN, bringing you democracy unfiltered.
Support for C-SPAN Radio comes from YouTube.
Welcome back to Washington Today. The United Kingdom's former U.S. Ambassador, Peter Mandelson, was arrested today in London on suspicion of misconduct in public office. Time.com writing today, quote, once a prominent figure in the UK's ruling Labour Party, Mandelson was sacked as ambassador in September, just months after his appointment, following disclosures from a batch of Epstein files that showed his relationship with the financier extended beyond what he'd previously disclosed. Peter Mandelson served as business secretary under former UK Prime Minister Gordon Brown from 2008 to 2010. And Time.com goes on to write, in one resurfaced email, Mandelson appeared to tell Epstein he would lobby other government officials in an effort to reduce a tax on bankers' bonuses. In another, he appeared to have forwarded an internal government report to Epstein, which showed ways the UK might raise funds after the 2008 financial crisis. That all from Time.com. Also today, U.S. District Judge Aileen Cannon permanently blocked the release of former special counsel Jack Smith's investigation into President Trump's keeping of classified documents at his home in Florida. Judge Cannon wrote in her decision that Jack Smith acted, quote, without lawful authority, obtained an indictment in this action, and initiated proceedings that resulted in a final order of dismissal of all charges. As a result, the former defendants in this case, like any other defendant in this situation, still enjoy the presumption of innocence held sacrosanct in our constitutional order. Scott Wilkins, senior counsel at the Knight First Amendment Institute at Columbia University, which was one of the groups pushing for the report's release, said in a statement, Judge Cannon's decision to permanently block the release of this extraordinarily significant report is impossible to square with the First Amendment and the common law. There is no legitimate basis for its continued suppression. And from Reuters, CDC Deputy Director Ralph Abraham resigned today. He is the second top official to leave the agency this month. Acting CDC head Dr. Jay Bhattacharya said the departure was effective immediately and attributed it to unforeseen family obligations. Ralph Abraham's exit follows that of his former acting CDC director Jim O'Neill earlier this month, and the firing of Dr. Susan Menares last summer, just after weeks after she had taken the job. Now, back on Capitol Hill today, a group of House and Senate Democrats hosted a forum on immigration enforcement operations. It included testimonies from a former Homeland Security General Counsel, a U.S. citizen whose home was forcefully entered by ICE agents, and Ryan Schwenk, a whistleblower and former ICE attorney. He talked about what led him to leave the agency.
I swore an oath to uphold the Constitution when I joined ICE on August 1st, 2021, as an assistant chief counsel. I followed that oath for 4.5 years, working side by side with ICE officers. And I followed it when I resigned on February 13th, 2026, a little over a week ago, so that I could speak to you today. I am here because I am duty-bound to report the legally required training program at the ICE Academy is deficient, defective, and broken. 5 months ago, I was asked to teach the law to new cadets at the ICE Academy in Glencoe, Georgia, where ICE is training its new, inexperienced recruits. I volunteered, those without law enforcement training, I volunteered to take on this assignment based on my experience in law enforcement oversight, including at the state and local level prior to my work with ICE. On my first day, I received secretive orders to teach new cadets to violate the Constitution by entering homes without a judicial warrant. For the last 5 months, I watched ICE dismantle the training program, cutting 240 hours of vital classes from a 584-hour program. Classes that teach the Constitution, our legal system, firearms training, the use of force, lawful arrests, proper detention, and the limits of officers' authority. For example, they ceased all of the legal instructions regarding use of force. This means that cadets are not taught what it means to be objectively reasonable, the very standard which the law requires them to meet when deciding whether or not to use deadly force. Our jobs as instructors are to teach them so well that they can make split-second decisions about what they can and cannot do in life or death situations. Yet, in the name of churning out an endless stream of officers, DHS leadership has dismantled the academic and practical tests that we need to know if cadets can safely and lawfully perform their job. All to satisfy an administration demanding they train thousands of new officers before the end of the year. DHS told the public that new cadets receive all the training they need to perform their duties, that no critical material or standards have been cut. This is a lie. ICE made the program shorter, and they removed so many essential parts that what remains is a dangerous husk. No reasonable person would believe a training program suddenly cut nearly in half could meet the minimum legal requirements. These aren't abstract rules. They're required in regulations such as 8 CFR 287G1. Congress requires immigration officers to meet minimum standards for a reason. ICE cannot lawfully perform their duties, make arrests, carry weapons, and use force without passing appropriate training.
Ryan Schwenk, former immigration and customs enforcement attorney, speaking on Capitol Hill today. Also today, House Judiciary Committee Democrats hosted a discussion on the First Amendment and alleged violations by the Trump administration. The forum comes after a federal grand jury recently rejected the Justice Department's attempt to indict a group of Democratic lawmakers for appearing in a video urging service members and intelligence officers to disobey any illegal orders by the Trump administration. One of the witnesses at this event, former Jimmy Kimmel Live writer Bess Kalb, who talked about her run-in with censorship.
I should tell you a little bit about one of my former jobs. When I wrote for Kimmel from 2012 through 2020, I was responsible for pitching about everyone, Democrats, Republicans, Kardashians. This was never supposed to be a job where I'd have to know anything more about the founding documents than an off-color joke about John Hancock. For late-night comedy writers, hi, Mom and Dad. For late-night comedy writers, the president is our best and worst audience. He is our best audience because, unlike most Americans, he watches late-night television. He cares about what the network men in suits say about him. He is our worst audience because his inexplicably bruised skin is very, very thin. He complained about our jokes frequently, often in real time, on his own social media site he invented so that nobody could make fun of him on it. This went far beyond social media tirades when this year, as Ranking Member Raskin mentioned, after Stephen Colbert told jokes about that $16 million settlement CBS personally paid to Trump, The Late Show with Stephen Colbert was bulldozed like it was the East Wing of the White House. Then months later, emboldened by the Colbert precedent, the administration had Jimmy Kimmel Live briefly yanked off the air when the show's monologue displeased the president. I want to be fair. The Trump administration denies responsibility for these cancellations, much as the mafia is continuously surprised that so many people end up in the East River with cement blocks on their feet. But what we can say for sure is that this president that so prized free speech and so loathed censorship was positively giddy on Truth Social about the literal cancellation of these comedians. He was so excited, he misspelled the word canceled. The president wrote, "Great news for America. The ratings challenge Jimmy Kimmel show is canceled. Congratulations to ABC for finally having the courage to do what had to be done. Kimmel has zero talent and worse ratings than even Colbert, if that's possible. That leaves Jimmy, Fallon, and Seth, two total losers on fake news NBC. Their ratings also horrible. Do it, NBC. President DJT." Then he got back to authorizing strikes against ISIS in Syria. To kill a late-night show doesn't just kill an enormous platform for speaking truth to power. Because late-night comedy doesn't just speak truth to power, it speaks truth to an incredibly large number of people. I believe late-night hosts like Colbert and Kimmel are vital satirists who shape how millions of Americans absorb the day's news. At 11:30 every weeknight, millions of people all over the country, just before their melatonin gummies hit, listen to what these comedians have to say about what happened in America that day. And under any administration, they are powerful voices of criticism and dissent. Network late-night hosts like Colbert and Kimmel have used their huge platforms to make tangible, incremental ideological change through satire, dressed up in a suit, in the hope that maybe someone who stayed up after the evening news on CBS or ABC will hear the news reflected back at them through a lens that is openly critical of the government, no matter who is in the Oval Office. And that can shape an electorate's opinion. And let's be clear, they're also doing interviews with The Bachelorette. But these permanent and temporary cancellations aren't just about controlling jokes. They're about controlling criticism of the administration and its corporate bedfellows. It is the state using its power to shape what is profitable to say. And we've learned nothing if not this: the bottom line comes first, even before the First Amendment.
Former Jimmy Kimmel Live writer Bess Kalb at a Democratic forum on the Trump administration and the First Amendment. You can see that entire event and the forum on ICE actions at cspan.org and the C-SPAN Now mobile app. And as we look ahead to tomorrow night's State of the Union speech, FoxNews.com reporting that House Speaker Mike Johnson plans to bring the family of Mark Tyler Brock. He is a police officer in Vivian, Louisiana, who was killed on the line of duty. Speaker Johnson also plans to bring Hanan Lashinsky, the brother of Yaron Lashinsky, who was killed alongside Sarah Milgram outside the Capitol Jewish Museum here in Washington, D.C. last May. Oregon Democratic Representative Maxine Dexter said she has invited Lisa Phillips, who is an Epstein abuse survivor, to sit in her seat tomorrow night while she holds a town hall in Oregon. Meanwhile, the White House says President Trump has invited both the gold medal winning U.S. Olympic hockey teams. The men's team reportedly accepted the invitation, but the women's team declined it. A USA Hockey spokesperson told NBC News, "We are sincerely grateful for the invitation extended to our gold medal-winning U.S. women's hockey team and deeply appreciate the recognition of their extraordinary achievement. Due to the timing and previously scheduled academic and professional commitments following the games, the athletes are unable to participate. They were honored to be included and are grateful for the acknowledgement." And this morning, we talked to Susan Ferriccio, national politics correspondent for the Washington Times, who has reported on many State of the Union speeches. We asked her what makes a good State of the Union speech.
They're all good in their own way. You know, something will happen at every one. Either the speech will have some important elements that make it different and exciting. The past few State of the Union addresses, I think they've just gotten wilder and wilder as Congress has gotten more partisan. I mean, Congress has gotten, I think, viciously partisan over the past decade. So I'm thinking back to some fascinating State of the Union addresses. Think of the one where I think it was Trump's final State of the Union address of his first term, where the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, famously or infamously tore up the copy of his speech when he concluded his address. That went viral, and people still talk about that moment. And then, of course, this very past address that the president gave, it was his first address of his second term. We had a Democratic lawmaker get up and shout at the president in the middle of his speech, and he was removed from the chamber.
You're talking about Al Green.
So, yes, Representative Al Green, and he was rebuked for that by Congress. These things are becoming more demonstrative. I think years ago, people did not bring in, these paddles, holding up signs, et cetera. That didn't happen. It was very respectful. And, the ugliest you'd see is the one side or the other not standing up and clapping with the other. And I think there have been attempts at bipartisanship. There's one, I think they still do this, where in the Senate, where they sit next to, opposite party lawmaker, and they try to make it more bipartisan. But it's really gotten more vicious. And this year will be interesting because there is a move, afoot to try to, for the Democrats, no public demonstrations in the chamber, because they don't want to detract from Trump or whatever missteps Trump might make. So the leader of the Democratic Party in the House, Hakeem Jeffries, has said, look, if you either don't go or be silent in your protests, but don't get up and make any public demonstrations in the chamber the way Representative Green did last year. So
anybody who's watched Al Green speak on the floor over the past year, he almost always has a poster that's a picture of himself from that very address, pointing his cane at Donald Trump. He's standing there on the House floor with that picture of him from that speech behind him.
Right, with pride. It's sort of the resistance. He's been resisting President Trump since the beginning of his first term.
Washington Times national politics correspondent Susan Ferriccio on this morning's Washington Journal. Our coverage of the State of the Union begins tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Eastern Time here on C-SPAN Radio and on C-SPAN. We'll have a preview of the evening from political reporters. Then at 9, it's the president's speech. That's followed by the Democratic response, this year given by Virginia Governor Abigail Spanberger. Of course, we'll take your calls and bring you reaction from lawmakers. And over on C-SPAN 2, you can experience the moments leading up to the speech and the speech itself as if you're there, uninterrupted, no commentary, with unfiltered sights and sounds. Of course, all of this will be streamed live on C-SPAN Now and cspan.org, which is also where you can find this program as a podcast, and it's on YouTube. Just search Washington Today. And if you want more on the stories that are shaping Washington every day, get our daily email word for word. Just go to cspan.org/connect to subscribe. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Thanks a lot for listening today to Washington Today.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal, our live forum inviting you to discuss the latest issues in government, politics, and public policy from Washington and across the country. Coming up Tuesday morning, we preview President Trump's State of the Union address with Wall Street Journal White House reporter Meredith McGraw. Then Tevi Troy of the Ronald Reagan Institute on the history and importance of the State of the Union, plus other political news. Also, former CIA Russia analyst George Beebe talks about the 4th anniversary of the Russia-Ukraine war. And later, more on the State of the Union address with The Hill's Emily Brooks. C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Join in the conversation live at 7 Eastern Tuesday morning on C-SPAN, C-SPAN Now, our free mobile app, or online at cspan.org.